Marcus Thompson was not your average CEO. At just 38 years old, he had built a tech empire from the ground up, turning a small startup into a billion-dollar company that revolutionized how people communicated online. But despite his massive success, Marcus wasn't one for flashy cars, expensive watches, or private jets. He preferred to keep things simple. On this particular day, he decided to do something he hadn't done in years: fly commercial. It wasn't about saving money. Marcus could afford to buy the airline if he wanted to. For him, it was about feeling connected to the world again, stepping out of the bubble of luxury and privilege that often came with being a CEO. So he booked a ticket under a fake name, Michael Reed, and dressed casually in a plain hoodie, faded jeans, and sneakers. No entourage, no assistants, no fanfare. Just Marcus, blending into the crowd like any other traveler. The airport buzzed with its usual chaos: families dragging suitcases, business people glued to their phones, and kids running around with too much energy. Marcus walked through the terminal, enjoying the anonymity. No one stopped him for autographs or asked to take selfies. It felt refreshing, almost liberating. As he approached the gate for his flight, he noticed the familiar scramble of airline staff preparing for boarding. Little did he know, this ordinary trip was about to take an extraordinary turn. Standing near the gate, Marcus glanced at the monitor displaying departure times. His flight was scheduled to leave in 20 minutes. He sipped from a coffee cup he'd picked up earlier, savoring the bitter taste. Around him, passengers began lining up, some chatting excitedly while others scrolled through their devices. Everything seemed normal until a young airline crew member approached him. She looked frazzled, her uniform slightly wrinkled, as though she'd been rushing around all morning. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice firm but polite. "Are you checking in for this flight?" Marcus nodded, holding up his boarding pass. "Yeah, I'm here for flight 412. The attendant studied the paper, then frowned. "I don't see your name on our list. Are you sure you're supposed to board now?" Marcus chuckled, thinking it must be a simple mix-up. "Positive. I printed this myself online. Maybe there's a delay updating the system." But the woman didn't seem convinced. Her tone shifted, becoming cooler, more authoritative. "Sir, if you're not cleared for boarding, I'll have to ask you to step aside. You can wait over there until we sort this out." She pointed vaguely toward a corner of the waiting area. For a moment, Marcus considered arguing. After all, he knew he had a valid ticket. But something stopped him. Perhaps it was curiosity, or maybe it was the amused glances from nearby passengers, who were clearly eavesdropping. Whatever the reason, Marcus simply smiled and stepped back, deciding to play along. For now. As he moved away from the gate, he couldn't help but notice how quickly everyone dismissed him. The same crew members who moments ago ignored him completely were now bustling around, treating other passengers with deference. A man in a sharp suit walked past, and they practically bowed as he passed. Marcus shook his head, amused yet intrigued by the situation unfolding before him. What none of them realized was that this quiet, unassuming man standing off to the side held far more power than anyone in the room could imagine. And soon they would find out exactly who he was, in the most unexpected way possible. As Marcus stood off to the side, leaning casually against a pillar, he couldn't help but observe the scene unfolding around him. The airline crew was busy organizing passengers for boarding, their movements brisk and efficient. Some travelers were greeted warmly, while others received little more than a nod or a quick scan of their tickets. It was fascinating how quickly people were categorized, whether by appearance, demeanor, or some unspoken assumption. The young attendant who had asked Marcus to step aside was now focused on another passenger, a tall man in an expensive-looking suit. His polished shoes gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and his leather briefcase looked like it cost more than most people's monthly rent. The attendant practically beamed as she assisted him, her tone dripping with respect. "Mr. Jensen, we've been expecting you," she said, her voice soft and deferential. "Your seat is ready, and we'll make sure everything is perfect for your flight." Marcus raised an eyebrow, watching the exchange with quiet amusement. He wasn't jealous or angry, just intrigued. This kind of treatment wasn't new to him. He'd experienced it plenty of times when people recognized his name or knew about his company. But today, dressed in his hoodie and sneakers, he was invisible. No one gave him a second glance. In fact, they seemed to go out of their way not to notice him. A few feet away, 2 other crew members huddled together, whispering urgently. One of them held a clipboard, flipping through pages as though searching for something important. Marcus caught bits and pieces of their conversation. "Supposed to arrive any minute," one of them murmured. "Make sure everything's ready. You know how picky these corporate types can be." Corporate types, Marcus smirked to himself. If only they knew. Meanwhile, the passengers waiting in line began exchanging glances, clearly curious about the commotion. A middle-aged woman leaned over to her companion and whispered loudly enough for Marcus to hear. "Must be some big wig coming. They're acting like royalty is about to walk through that door." Her friend chuckled, shaking her head. "Probably. Just another CEO flying first class. Happens all the time." Marcus found himself wondering what would happen if he revealed his identity right then and there. Would anyone believe him? Or would they dismiss him as a prankster, someone trying to stir up trouble? He decided against it, choosing instead to stay silent and see where this strange situation would lead. Back at the gate, the tension among the crew grew thicker. The attendant who had spoken to Marcus earlier kept glancing nervously at her watch, tapping her foot impatiently. Finally, she turned to a colleague and said, "We need to find him. He should have been here by now." "What? If he misses the flight? Who are you talking about?" Marcus asked casually, stepping forward before he could stop himself. The attendant blinked, startled as though she'd forgotten he was even there. "Oh, She hesitated, clearly unsure whether to answer. Then, deciding it wouldn't. "Hurt," she replied. "Our boss, a very important executive, is supposed to join us on this flight. We've been told to give him VIP treatment." Marcus nodded slowly, his lips curling into a faint smile. "Important executive, huh? Must be quite the guy." "You have no idea," the attendant muttered under her breath, turning back to her. "Clipboard." But Marcus did have an idea, and as he stood there, watching the chaos unfold, he realized this moment was about far more than just a mix-up at the airport. It was a reflection of how easily people judged others based on appearances, and how wrong those judgments could be. Still, he didn't say a word. Not yet. He wanted to see how long it would take for them to figure it out on their own. Little did they know, the important executive they were so desperately searching for was standing right in front of them, waiting patiently, and quietly enjoying every second of the confusion. As Marcus continued to observe the growing frenzy among the airline crew, his mind began to wander. He thought about how often moments like this had happened throughout his life, not just professionally, but personally too. There was the time in college when a professor assumed he didn't belong in an advanced engineering class because of the color of his skin. Or the countless meetings early in his career where clients would instinctively address his white colleagues instead of him, even though he was the one leading the project. It wasn't anger that filled Marcus now, but a deep sense of reflection. These experiences weren't unique to him. They were part of a pattern rooted in unconscious bias and societal expectations. And while he'd long since stopped letting these moments define him, they still lingered in the back of his mind, reminders of the work that needed to be done. The attendant's earlier words echoed in his head. "If you're not cleared for boarding, I'll have to ask you to step aside." To her, Marcus had looked out of place. A man who didn't fit the image she associated with someone important enough to board first. It wasn't malicious necessarily, but it was telling. Her assumption had been automatic, almost reflexive. That's what made it so powerful and so dangerous. Nearby, the 2 crew members whispering about the bigwig executive were still flipping through their papers, clearly frustrated. "I don't get it," one of them muttered. "He should have checked in by now. What if something went wrong?" "What if he already did check in?" the other replied sarcastically, "and we sent him away without realizing it." Marcus stifled a laugh at the irony of the comment. If only they knew how close they were to the truth. A few passengers nearby overheard the exchange and started speculating aloud. "Maybe he missed the flight," suggested a man in a baseball cap. "Wouldn't that be embarrassing for them?" "Or maybe he's stuck in traffic," chimed in a woman holding a toddler. "You know how those big shots always think they can show up whenever they want." Marcus listened intently, finding humor in their guesses. None of them could have imagined that the person they were waiting for was standing right there, unnoticed, and underestimated. But beyond the amusement, he felt a pang of sadness. How many others had been dismissed in similar ways? How many talented individuals had been overlooked simply because they didn't look or act the part? His thoughts drifted to his own journey. Growing up in a modest neighborhood, Marcus had learned early on that success wouldn't come easily. People doubted him at every turn. Not outright cruelty, but subtle dismissals that chipped away at his confidence. Yet those doubts had fueled him, pushing him to prove everyone wrong. Now, decades later, he stood as proof that appearances could be deceiving. But he also knew he was lucky. Not everyone got the chance to rewrite their narrative the way he had. Just then, another crew member rushed over, panic written all over her face. "We've got a problem," she whispered urgently to her colleagues. "Headquarters is asking why Mr. Thompson hasn't boarded yet. They said he's supposed to be here." The name hit Marcus like a jolt. He straightened up slightly, curious, to see how this revelation would play out. The attendants exchanged panicked glances, their faces pale. "Mr. Thompson," one of them repeated, her voice trembling. "Wait, are you talking about the Marcus Thompson, the CEO of Novatech?" "Yes," the newcomer hissed. "And apparently, he owns this airline now. Didn't anyone tell you?" The room seemed to freeze for a moment. All eyes turned toward Marcus, who stood silently, arms crossed, watching the chaos unfold. The same attendant who had told him to step aside just minutes ago suddenly froze, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Realization dawned on her face, followed quickly by horror. For Marcus, it was both satisfying and sobering. Satisfying because he knew this moment would force them to confront their biases. Sobering because he understood that it wasn't really about him. It was about the millions of people who never got the chance to flip the script the way he just had. This wasn't just a mix-up at the airport. It was a lesson. One he hoped they, and everyone else watching, would remember long after the flight took off. The realization rippled through the group of airline staff like a shockwave. One by one, their eyes locked onto Marcus, who still stood, casually leaning against the pillar, his expression unreadable. The attendant who had told him to step aside earlier looked as though she'd seen a ghost. Her clipboard slipped from her hands, clattering loudly on the floor. But no one moved to pick it up. The air was thick with tension, and for a moment the entire gate area fell silent. Finally, the senior crew member, the one who had been frantically searching for Mr. Thompson, stepped forward hesitantly. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Sir, are you Marcus Thompson?" Marcus tilted his head slightly, his lips curling into a small, enigmatic smile. "That depends," he said calmly, his tone measured. "Are you finally ready to let me board my flight?" The woman's face flushed crimson. She stammered, stumbling over her words. "Oh my goodness, Mr. Thompson, we didn't recognize you. We thought, well, we assumed. You weren't supposed to be here yet. Please forgive us." Before Marcus could respond, the rest of the crew scrambled into action. Another attendant rushed over, practically tripping over herself in her haste to apologize. "Mr. Thompson, I am so sorry," she blurted out. "We had no idea it was you. If we'd known, you wouldn't have asked me to wait outside?" Marcus finished for her, his voice calm but laced with quiet authority. He wasn't yelling or making a scene, but there was an undeniable weight behind his words. Everyone froze, their faces burning with embarrassment. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone. Here they were, treating the very man they'd been anxiously preparing for as though he didn't belong. And what made it worse was that Marcus hadn't done anything to hide his identity. He'd simply blended in, choosing not to flaunt his status or wealth. It was their assumptions that had led them astray. One of the younger attendants, visibly shaken, whispered to her colleague, "I can't believe this is happening." But Marcus heard her anyway. Instead of responding directly, he turned his attention back to the senior crew member. "So," he said evenly, "what exactly were you planning for me today? A special seat? Complimentary champagne? Maybe a red carpet rolled out at the gate?" His tone wasn't mocking, but it carried just enough edge to make everyone squirm. The senior attendant swallowed hard before answering. We wanted to ensure your experience was seamless, sir. First-class accommodations, priority boarding, personalized service." Marcus nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch for a beat longer than necessary. Then, without missing a beat, he gestured toward the line of the passengers waiting to board. "Funny thing is," he said, glancing around at the crowd, "none of these people get any of that treatment. They're just regular travelers, doing their best to catch a flight. Yet somehow, because of who I am, or rather, who I'm assumed to be, I'm supposed to receive special privileges. Does that seem fair to you?" No one answered. The question hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. Marcus didn't wait for a response. Instead, he bent down to retrieve the fallen clipboard, handing it back to the flustered attendant. "Let's not waste any more time," he said gently. "I'd like to board now, please." The crew sprang into motion, ushering him toward the front of the line. Passengers nearby craned their necks, whispering excitedly as they pieced together what had happened. Some looked impressed, others seemed amused. A few even clapped softly, clearly enjoying the spectacle. As Marcus walked past the gate, he paused briefly, turning back to address the crew. "By the way," he added, his voice firm but not unkind, "this isn't about punishing anyone. It's about understanding how easy it is to misjudge someone based on appearances. Don't let this be the end of the conversation. It should be the beginning." With that, he stepped onto the jet bridge, leaving behind a group of stunned airline employees and a crowd of passengers buzzing with the kind of story that would dominate dinner conversations for weeks to come. For Marcus, however, this was far from over. He knew the real work lay ahead, not just for the airline, but for society as a whole, and he intended to lead the charge. Once Marcus stepped onto the plane, he could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him, not because of what had just happened, but because of what it represented. The apologies from the airline crew still echoed in his ears, their frantic attempts to make amends lingering like an awkward aftertaste. But Marcus wasn't interested in dwelling on blame or guilt. What mattered most to him was turning this moment into something meaningful. As he settled into his seat, economy class, despite being offered an immediate upgrade, he pulled out his phone and opened a blank note. His fingers hovered over the screen for a moment as he thought about how to frame the conversation that needed to happen. This wasn't just about one mistaken assumption at an airport gate. It was about a much larger issue that affected countless lives every single day. By the time the plane took off, Marcus had drafted a clear plan in his mind. When they landed, he would call an emergency meeting with the senior executives of the Airline, a company he now owned thanks to a recent acquisition. He didn't want to punish the staff involved in the mix-up. Instead, he wanted to use this incident as a catalyst for change. It was an opportunity to address systemic biases head-on, starting within his own organization. When the flight touched down, Marcus wasted no time. Within hours, he convened a meeting with the airline's leadership team. The room was tense as he entered, his presence commanding immediate attention. Everyone knew who he was by now, not just as the CEO of Novatech, but also as the man who had been mistakenly treated like an outsider on one of their flights. "Let's cut to the chase," Marcus began, his voice steady and calm. "What happened today wasn't personal. It wasn't about me. It was a symptom of a bigger problem, unconscious bias. And if we don't tackle it, it will keep happening. Not just here, but everywhere." The executives exchanged uneasy glances. Some nodded in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Marcus continued, leaning forward slightly to emphasize his point. "Think about it. Why did my appearance lead people to assume I didn't belong? Why did it take finding out who I really am for anyone to treat me differently? Those assumptions aren't harmless. They shape decisions, policies, and even careers. That's why we need to do better." He then outlined a bold initiative aimed at addressing these issues. First, he proposed mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all employees, from ground staff to top-level management. This wouldn't be a checkbox exercise, he emphasized, but a comprehensive program designed to challenge stereotypes and foster empathy. Second, he announced plans to create a mentorship program specifically for minority employees within the airline industry. "We talk a lot about diversity," Marcus said, "but true inclusion means giving people opportunities to grow and succeed, not just hiring them." Finally, he revealed his most ambitious idea yet, a scholarship fund for underrepresented students pursuing careers in aviation. "This isn't just about fixing mistakes," he explained. "It's about building a future where everyone has a fair shot, regardless of where they come from or what they look like." The room was silent for a moment as the weight of his words sank in. Then, slowly, applause broke out. It started with one executive, then spread until the entire room joined in. Marcus allowed himself a small smile, knowing this was only the beginning. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but he was determined to see it through. Before leaving the meeting, he added one final thought. "Remember, this isn't about me. It's about us, all of us. If we can learn from today, we'll be taking a step toward making sure no one else gets told to wait outside when they deserve to be right where they are." With that, Marcus stood up, signaling the end of the discussion. As he walked out of the conference room, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about holding the airline accountable, it was about leading by example. And if done right, it could spark a movement far beyond the walls of any boardroom. The days following the incident were a whirlwind for Marcus. News of what had happened at the airport spread like wildfire, fueled by social media posts from passengers who had witnessed the scene firsthand. Headlines blared across newspapers and online platforms. Undercover CEO mistaken for gate crasher. Airline crew apologizes after misidentifying billionaire boss. And even Marcus Thompson's quiet lesson on bias goes viral. At first, Marcus tried to ignore the attention. He wasn't one to seek the spotlight, and he certainly hadn't orchestrated the situation for publicity. But as comments poured in, from everyday people sharing their own stories of being underestimated to industry leaders praising his response, he realized this moment had struck a chord far beyond his expectations. Sitting alone in his home office, late one evening, Marcus scrolled through some of the reactions online. One comment stood out to him. "I've been that person they dismissed without a second glance. Thank you, Mr. Thompson, for reminding us that assumptions can cut deep, but change is possible." Reading those words made Marcus pause. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about all the people who saw themselves in his story, the ones who had faced similar indignities but never had the chance to flip the script. That night, unable to sleep, Marcus reflected on his own journey. Growing up, he'd often felt invisible, overlooked because of his background or appearance. Those moments had shaped him, teaching him resilience and determination. But they had also left scars, reminders of how isolating it could feel to be, judged before given a fair chance. Now, decades later, he found himself in a position to make a difference, not just for himself, but for others who still faced those same barriers. The next morning, Marcus decided to take action. He called his communications team and asked them to prepare a statement, not to defend himself or criticize the airline staff, but to amplify the conversation. "This isn't about shaming anyone," he told his team firmly. "It's about using this moment to drive real change." When the statement went public, it resonated deeply. In it, Marcus acknowledged the embarrassment of the crew members involved but redirected the focus towards systemic issues. "Bias isn't always intentional," he wrote, "but its impact is real, and we all have a responsibility to confront it. Let's turn this into an opportunity to build a more inclusive world, one where everyone is seen for who they truly are." The response was overwhelming. Messages flooded in from around the globe, people thanking Marcus for speaking out, educators asking permission to share his story in classrooms, and activists inviting him to speak at conferences on diversity and inclusion. Even critics of corporate culture praised his approach, calling it a masterclass in leadership. Amid the chaos, Marcus took time to reflect personally. On a quiet weekend afternoon, he visited a local park near his home, watching families laugh and children play. He thought about the scholarship program he'd announced and imagined the lives it might touch. Perhaps one day, a young girl from an underserved community would step onto a plane, not as a passenger, but as a pilot. Or maybe a boy who once dreamed of engineering airplanes would grow up to design innovations that changed the industry forever. As he sat there, Marcus reminded himself why he had started his company in the first place: to create opportunities for people who didn't think they had any. This latest chapter in his life felt like an extension of that mission, a chance to break down barriers not just in tech, but in industries everywhere. By Monday morning, Marcus returned to work with renewed energy. His initiatives were already gaining traction. The airline's leadership team had begun implementing the diversity training programs, and applications for the scholarship fund were pouring in faster than expected. More importantly, conversations about bias and inclusion were happening in boardrooms, classrooms, and living rooms worldwide. For Marcus, this was proof that moments of discomfort could lead to growth, if you were willing to lean into them. And while the road ahead wouldn't be easy, he knew every step forward mattered. After all, change didn't happen overnight, but it always started with someone brave enough to say, "We can do better." In the weeks that followed, Marcus's actions began to ripple outward, creating waves of change far beyond what anyone had anticipated. The airline crew member who had initially told him to wait outside reached out to Marcus personally, her email filled with heartfelt remorse. She introduced herself as Emily and explained how ashamed she felt about her mistake. "I've spent years working in customer service, always trying to treat everyone equally," she wrote, "but your experience made me realize how easy it is to let biases slip through, even when we don't mean to." Marcus read her message thoughtfully before replying. He didn't want to dismiss her apology outright, nor did he want to let her off the hook without encouraging growth. In his response, he thanked her for reaching out and acknowledged her sincerity. "What happened wasn't just about you," he wrote back. "It was a reflection of patterns we all fall into. The important thing now is learning from it, and using this moment to help others avoid similar mistakes." To his surprise, Emily replied again, this time asking if she could meet him in person. Intrigued, Marcus agreed. They met at a quiet cafe near the airport where Emily shared more about her life, how she'd grown up in a small town with limited exposure to diversity, and how she'd joined the airline industry hoping to see more of the world. "That day changed me," she admitted. "It made me realize how much I still need to learn." Marcus listened intently, nodding as she spoke. By the end of their conversation, he offered her a unique opportunity to join the newly formed advisory board overseeing the airline's diversity initiatives. "You've already shown courage by owning your mistake," he told her. "Now, help us turn that lesson into something meaningful." Emily accepted gratefully and soon became one of the program's most passionate advocates. Her story inspired other employees to come forward with their own experiences, sparking open dialogues. Across the company, these conversations weren't always comfortable. In fact, many were downright difficult, but they were necessary. Slowly but surely, attitudes began to shift. Meanwhile, Marcus's scholarship fund gained momentum. Applications poured in from students around the country, each essay more compelling than the last. One applicant, a high school senior named Jamal, wrote about growing up watching planes take off from a nearby airfield and dreaming of becoming a pilot despite financial hardships. Another, a young woman named Priya, described how her love for engineering stemmed from tinkering with broken electronics as a child. Reading these stories reminded Marcus why he had started this journey in the first place. The scholarship recipients were announced after a rigorous selection process, and Marcus personally invited them to attend a special ceremony hosted by the airline. During the event, he stood on stage alongside the winners, sharing not only their achievements but also his vision for the future. "These are the leaders of tomorrow," he declared, gesturing toward the awestruck students seated beside him. "They're proof that potential exists everywhere. You just have to look for it." The media coverage of the event further amplified Marcus's message. Journalists highlighted the transformative power of second chances, not just for individuals like Emily, but for entire organizations willing to confront uncomfortable truths. Industry experts praised Marcus's leadership style, calling it a blueprint for modern executives navigating complex social issues. Even competitors began taking notice, with some announcing plans to adopt similar diversity programs within their own companies. As the months passed, Marcus kept pushing forward. He partnered with advocacy groups to expand his initiatives beyond aviation, bringing workshops and mentorship opportunities to schools and businesses nationwide. Every step of the way, he emphasized collaboration over criticism, focusing on solutions rather than blame. By year's end, the airline had become a model for inclusivity, earning accolades from customers and employees alike. But for Marcus, the true measure of success wasn't in awards or headlines, it was in the lives touched along the way. From Emily, who found redemption in humility, to Jamal and Priya, whose dreams were finally within reach, the impact of that single day at the airport stretched farther than anyone could have imagined. And yet, Marcus knew this was only the beginning. There was still so much work to be done, but if one moment of misunderstanding could spark such profound change, then anything was possible. Months turned into a year, and Marcus Thompson's story became more than just an anecdote. It became a movement. The airline he had once been asked to wait outside of was now hailed as one of the most inclusive companies in the industry. Passengers noticed the difference immediately. Staff members greeted travelers with genuine warmth, regardless of their appearance or attire. Employees spoke proudly about the training programs that had taught them to see beyond first impressions. And for Marcus, it felt like proof that change, though challenging, was always worth pursuing. One crisp autumn morning, Marcus received an email from Emily, the same crew member who had initially mistaken him for someone unworthy of boarding. Attached to her message was a photo of her standing alongside Jamal, the high school senior whose scholarship essay about watching planes take off had moved Marcus deeply. Jamal was now interning at the airline, working closely with engineers to design fuel-efficient aircraft systems. In the picture, both Emily and Jamal were smiling, their pride evident even through the screen. "I never thought I'd say this," Emily wrote, "but thank you for that day. It changed everything, for me, for Jamal, and for so many others. You didn't just teach us, you inspired us to do better." Marcus stared at the photo for a long time, his chest swelling with quiet satisfaction. This was what leadership meant. Not wielding power over others, but empowering them to grow, to dream, and to lead themselves. He replied simply, "The credit belongs to all of you. Keep going." That evening, Marcus attended a gala celebrating the success of his diversity initiatives. The event was held in a grand ballroom filled with luminaries from across industries, business leaders, activists, educators, and even a few government officials. As he stepped onto the stage to deliver the keynote speech, the room erupted into applause. For a moment, Marcus stood silently, taking in the sea of faces before him. Then, he began to speak. "When I walked into that airport gate last year," he said, his voice steady and clear, "I wasn't looking for recognition, or even justice. I was simply trying to catch a flight. But sometimes, life hands you moments that demand more than silence. Moments that ask you to step up and use your platform for something greater." He went on to share stories of transformation, from Emily's journey of self-reflection to Jamal's determination to soar above limitations. He talked about Priya, whose innovative ideas were already reshaping how airlines approached sustainability, and he highlighted countless other examples of people who had embraced the challenge of building a fairer, more inclusive world. "But let's be honest," Marcus added, pausing to let his words sink in. "This work isn't easy. It requires humility, patience, and courage. It means confronting uncomfortable truths, not just about others but about ourselves. And it means staying committed, even when progress feels slow." As he wrapped up his speech, Marcus left the audience with a final thought. Change doesn't happen because of one person or one moment. It happens because ordinary people decide to make extraordinary choices. So tonight, I want to challenge each of you. What choice will you make tomorrow? Who will you choose to see? And how will you help them rise? The crowd rose to its feet, cheering loudly as Marcus stepped away from the podium. Reporters swarmed him afterward, asking questions about his plans for the future. Would he expand his initiatives to other industries? Was he considering running for office? Marcus smiled politely but gave no definitive answers. To him, the real story wasn't about what came next. It was about what had already begun. In the months that followed, Marcus continued to champion equality, quietly funding projects and supporting grassroots movements without seeking the spotlight. His name remained synonymous with resilience and integrity, a reminder that true greatness lay not in titles or wealth, but in the ability to uplift others. And while Marcus knew society still had a long way to go, he also believed in the power of small victories. After all, every life touched, every bias challenged, and every opportunity created brought the world one step closer to fairness. For Marcus Thompson, that was enough. Some battles couldn't be won overnight, but with persistence, compassion, and hope, they could eventually be overcome.